Well, hello, young friends. I'm filming this in hopes that you'll get an opportunity to look at it this evening, Monday night, prior to tomorrow morning's class. I just got home from a long day, long drive, but I won't go into that now. But I'm kind of. So, in Keith Stenglin's book, Ethics Beyond Rules, in your reading for today, chapter 4 is entitled, What Does Love Require? And you'll notice, if you haven't already, that that's sort of a recurring theme in your reading for today or tomorrow, and really a recurring theme, of course, for the semester of this course. It's worth noting that in his footnotes, and I encourage you always to at least glance at footnotes. Keep a little rabbit ear marker on your page. Go back, see who he's quoting. It might even send you in directions where you'd like to, look further, being the young scholars that you are. And so on page 215, chapter 4, footnote 4, I must have had a look at this. This central question about the requirements of love, what does love require, follows from the greatest love commands and has been asked by Christians for centuries since. In asking about the demands of love, I'm also inspired by Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Ethics, which is quoted at the beginning of chapter 4. The question, in many ways, is an effective summary of that book, and really one could say an effective summary, again, of Christian ethics. However, he says, the precise wording comes from the final stanza of a song that has been one of my favorites for nearly 3 decades. I was so excited to read this because the song is written by, as he says, Sam Phillips. That's a woman. She used to go, by the way, by the name of Leslie, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. She's now Sam Phillips and Joseph Henry Burnett, better known, although perhaps not by any of you, by the name of T-Bone Burnett. Good old T-Bone Burnett. T-Bone Burnett, who was, for a good stretch of time, including when this album was made, Sam Phillips' husband, very interesting fellow, very fine musician. In your generation, if you would know any connection to him at all, it would depend on whether or not you've ever seen Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? A very fine Coen Brothers film, worth your watching. The soundtrack was all done, collected. He didn't perform it all, but T-Bone Burnett was in charge of the music for that film and the soundtrack and so on. And that actually propelled him to a new level of, we'll say, notoriety or fame when that movie came out. Although he's been around a long time and pretty well known in certain, we'll say, rock circles. He was a friend and part of the traveling band of Bob Dylan for a good stretch, I would say probably in the early 70s. I think that he was one of the people who had some kind of background influence, certainly in Dylan's conversion. T-Bone Burnett was and is a Christian, as far as I know, of the Episcopalian sort, and is a very accomplished musician. Well, he was the co-writer and the producer of the album from which this song, Same Changes, I'm telling you a lot of detail, I know. Too bad. I'm expanding your world. Keith Stenglin then ends his footnote, I highly recommend the song to readers. Well, as you likely have seen by now, I'm providing an internet link to that song. It's actually created by NPR, National Public Radio, for whom she's also done, if you ever heard of the Tiny Desk, I think they're called Tiny Desk concerts, something to that effect. Maybe some of the artists that you know have done Tiny Desk concerts for NPR. She's done one. It's worth watching for sure. I do know that it was a very hot day, and apparently the air conditioning was not working at the NPR offices that day, because there's a lot of comments about how hot it is. But you'll get a sense for Sam Phillips and her kind of unique and quirky personality if you were to watch that. Well, this song, Same Changes, he's got the date of 1994. Sounds about right. This song comes from an album rather ironically titled Martinis and Bikinis. Ironic given that, it's a Christian ethics author who's citing this song. Now, her use of the phrase martinis and bikinis with a somewhat, we might say, lurid and possibly suggestive album cover that I think also you have access to, and that's Sam Phillips on the bed. Not in a particular, well, anyway. In the song where she's being sarcastic about martinis and bikinis for all our friends. She's definitely poking some critique at the LA scene, where of course she was living by 1994 and still lives. I got to hear her in concert a couple years ago. Don't have time to talk about that now. But I do want to tell you that I heard this album for the first time at the checking it out at the Nampa Public Library. It was a CD to check out, take home. I think by then I'd heard of her though, and loved her music. But she could easily have been under my radar all these years. I don't know whether I would have ever known of her were it not for a student at Northwest Nazarene College while I was teaching there, asking me, I still remember this guy, nice guy, a very pleasant fellow, and into Christian music, and he asked me if I'd ever heard of Sam Phillips. I said, no, I don't think so. And he brought me several CDs, albums by her, and as time went on, I learned that she had gone by Leslie Phillips and was quite well known within, what we call the contemporary Christian music circles in the 1980s. But she had become rather disillusioned, I'm sure on many fronts, and I don't know all the details of that journey for her. I do know that the Christian industry wanted to make her the Christian Cyndi Lauper. I don't know that she ever really wanted to be the Christian Cyndi Lauper. I don't even know if you know who Cyndi Lauper is. Girls just want to have fun. But she did several Christian albums, and I've listened. I don't know if I've listened to them all. And I have some of them, or at least some of the songs on most of them. And it's clear that early she was a very thoughtful songwriter. And at some point, in fact, with an album in the late 80s, maybe about 87 or so, she came out with an album called Turning, or The Turning. It was her last album on a Christian label. That label, by the way, was called Myrrh Records, as in gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When I was your age, Myrrh Records was the cool Christian label. Not everybody was on Myrrh, but everybody wanted to be. And she did, that was kind of, and it's a great album. Oh my goodness, The Turning. That one was produced by T-Bone Burnett. So at some point, she had met this guy, T-Bone Burnett. He had undoubtedly sort of broadened her horizons and blew her mind in some ways. I think I read somewhere that she'd never really listened to the Beatles until T-Bone Burnett came along. Of course, the Beatles were, had come and gone quite a ways by then. But in fact, that reminds me that this particular album, are you having fun yet? Martinis and Bikinis. I'm not the only one to say this. This is widely acknowledged that Burnett's love for the Beatles comes out most obviously and clearly in a great deal of the music on this album, including the song in question, Same Changes. I've never really understood the lyrics particularly of Same Changes. I always have remembered that the question, what does love require, is in there. So I recognize that immediately. But I thought we might spend some time in class actually just, both listening to the music and tracking with the lyrics, seeing if anything, meaningful comes to mind for anybody. But I will say that this album, The Turning, and then she did one called The Indescribable Wow. And then she did one, and I can't remember the name of it. This music from the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, she is hitting it. I mean, that's, I know, a different era than yours. But if you were to listen to that, you would recognize it, as being from that era. But more importantly, you'd recognize it as being really good. Good music with amazing lyrics. This woman is a poet. So when I saw that album at the Napa Public Library, I took it home, checked it out, listened to it, loved it, and really have I've bought everything that Sam Phillips has recorded since. She definitely, when she stepped away from the contemporary Christian music world, and took a lot of judgment, and that was part of what she didn't like, was the increasing, I think, to put it simply, republicanizing of the evangelical church, in the sense that it was becoming increasingly politicized, and politicized by a kind of right-wing politic that all too easily becomes Christian nationalism. I'm not saying that was all on her mind, although I think some of that was. And she eventually kind of phased out of that. I do want to say, and it might even be on this album, it might be, but she has a song called I Need Love. By the way, it ended up being in the soundtrack of a different movie, a wonderful movie called Stealing Beauty. I remember seeing it it was sort of an artsy type movie, seeing it at, one of these cool theaters, and I'm loving it. And near at the end, all of a sudden I recognize these opening chords, and then it's Sam Phillips, and I thought, oh, so cool. Sam Phillips has a song in Stealing Beauty. Well, in that song, I Need Love, one of the things she sings is, I need God and not the political church. Now, we all need to be wise enough to know that there's no such thing as a non-political church, in the sense that the church is people, and the term politics comes from the Greek word polis, that also means people. And so political, dimensions are unavoidable. What I would love to encourage us to think about is how the church itself, ideally, should be a distinct polis, and I'm far from the only one to suggest this. But currently, our churches are sort of caught up in the American imagination of a two-party system, with those parties vying for power, and so the church sort of, gets caught in the middle of that and becomes politicized. We can't avoid politics, of course. What Sam Phillips and many other people of her era, including into our own, have tired of is what they see as a certain kind of politicization of the church, in which its imagination for the capacities for love have been co-opted by other visions. We can even talk about that if we want, perhaps. We certainly will before the semester's over. But I want to give a little background for this song, Same Changes, and the line that really grabs Keith Stanglin in a song he loves, and presumably an album. I'll email him and we'll find out. I'll get some feedback from him. This song, Same Changes, with the question, what does love require?